A bill introduced in the Washington State Legislature this session would bolster an existing law that seeks to shield individuals receiving or providing quote-unquote protected health care services, such as abortion or gender reassignment procedures on minors. Here with more on this is the Center Square's Washington reporter, TJ Martinell. TJ, let's start with the background. Tell us about the SHIELD law enacted in 2023 and other legislation on the books that addresses this issue.
Yeah, so the SHIELD law restricts the ability of courts and law enforcement to either issue or enforce any subpoenas, warrants, or extradition for civil or criminal liability related to protective health services as defined by state law, which, as you mentioned, include abortion and gender reassignment procedures. And something to note that's important here is that this includes individuals who are under the age of 18. So this SHIELD law is intended to protect legally people who are coming to our state, Washington State, to have these procedures and medical services performed where it is illegal to do so in the state that they are a resident of. And then there's the other. So going a little back, there was a 1985 state law that allows minors 13 and older to get mental health services without parental notice or consent. But what's happened since then is they've tacked on additional stuff as to what constitutes mental health services. So now it's to the point where they can get gender affirming treatments without parental knowledge or consent. And this is based on other bills that they've added. Insurance companies are not allowed to inform parents when they receive these services. They are informed when they're billed for it, though, which should make for interesting conversations between parents and kids when they get the bill in the mail. And then there's an additional law that was passed 2 years ago, the same year as the SHIELD law, and it allows host homes and youth shelters to legally hide underage individuals who identify as being a runaway seeking gender affirming care. So these are all these laws that are on the books right now in Washington State.
So if passed, what would Senate Bill 5632 do?
So what it would do is it would tack on additional provisions that further restrict state and local officials from cooperating or providing information related to an out-of-state investigation. So let's say that somebody let's say they made it illegal in Idaho for someone to come to Washington State to have an abortion or gender reassignment procedures for someone under the age of 18 or just for somebody in general. And they were looking into potentially pursuing charges against that person on suspicion that they did so. Washington State would not allow any cooperation or any information to be passed along to those investigators. So if it's legal in Washington State, they're not allowed to cooperate with an out-of-state investigation into whether or not that person violated something that's illegal in that state.
What has the bill sponsor and other supporters of this bill had to say in favor of it?
What they're trying to do is, I'd say, add further protections and maybe expand those protections on individuals who may not be providing these services themselves, the medical services, and they're not the person who's coming and seeking it. They're people who are acting as sort of a intermediary, or they're just assisting that person. So there's services right now, just as an example, there's private airline flight services that will fly people from one state to another to have an abortion performed if that person's from a state where the abortion is illegal. And some of these private flight services don't ask any questions about the person. They don't ask their name, age. They don't ask any of that stuff. The only thing that they want to know is how much that person weighs to ensure that the plane can actually, because they're probably small planes in question. But in our state, for example, we had people testifying that they pick up people from the airport. They drive them to doctor appointments. Sometimes they have procedures that are related that are performed that, they sedate the patient. So that person's not legally allowed to drive after the procedure. So they need to have someone drive them. These people are concerned that they could be prosecuted or investigated by people from out of state, from law enforcement from out of state for if that was to ever become illegal. to help someone from one state. Again, just using an example, Idaho, let's say that they passed a law saying that somebody in Washington State aiding one of their residents in getting an abortion or gender reassignment procedures could be prosecuted by that state. This bill is intended to ensure that the Washington State officials of any kind, local or state level, will not cooperate or provide information that would aid in that investigation.
And what have opponents of the bill said?
One of the individuals testifying said that their thought is Washington State is out of step with the nation as a whole, and that this is not a good use of taxpayer dollars or funding, and that these procedures should not, some of these procedures, I mean, we're talking about some, again, I just want to emphasize, we are talking about instances where it could involve underage individuals who are potentially traveling to Washington State without parental notice, without parental consent. And depending on the situation, they could flee to Washington State, and any host home or youth shelter that they enter under Washington State law would not have to report them as missing to the parents or to law enforcement or to anybody if that individual claims to be seeking gender affirming care or something like that. So it's going to create some interesting situations potentially with states where the fact that it's illegal in their state doesn't mean anything if that person's able to receive services in another state and they're given resources to make that practically possible to travel. So let's say somebody's from Florida and they want to get one of these procedures done. They can travel to Washington State, and from what I'm seeing, that's a lot of that stuff's paid for by other people. For example, the organization that picks people up from the airport or takes them to doctor appointments is a volunteer organization. So these are people who are volunteering to do this stuff. And I don't think that the people who are receiving these services are being charged.
Well, TJ, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.